Welcome to the Recast monthly roundup for the month of September. This is a compilation of everything that was new and fresh on the Recast platform. We ventured down to Loftus Road to see the boys in action from QPR. And we've even been down to Goodwood to get highlights from the Festival of Speed and the Revival. We made our way all the way down to Romania to hit the trail to look at the Red Bull Romaniacs. And we've even caught up with the E-Tour at the Haute Tarentaise 2021. Jack Grealish popped in to give us an update on his life at Man City. Check out all the best from the Junior Boys Table Tennis Championships. Oh, and we even had flying cars. We entered into a unique partnership with the Red Star Rugby boys in Belgrade. And plus behind the scenes batting footage from Chris Gale and a tour of Parc des Princes with Caddy. And all the fresh action from the ladies down at Hibs. Thanks very much and look out for the monthly roundup for October.
Good afternoon again, everybody. Welcome back to the Tech and Innovation stage. Welcome along if it's your first time in here today. We have another terrific session in store, a terrific conversation where we will be reimagining shortly the future of sports content and sports media with our all-star panel. We'll be looking at how the creator economy and gaming is affecting sports media consumption. It's a new world and it's time to re-evaluate. This session has been put together with Recast, the UK's newest sports and esports social video app. You got a flavour of what they were up to in September there. And with us to take a look at this very hot topic, it might even be a red hot topic, through something of a Scottish lens, we're joined by Greg McEwan, Commercial Director at Hibernian FC, Andy Meikle, CEO and co-founder of Recast, and joining us, jetting in all the way from Switzerland to be with us, Sarah Lewis, Global Sports Leader and the former General Secretary of the International Ski Federation. So let's welcome them all to the stage. Lovely to have you all with us. Thanks for being here. It's great to be in person, as we've been saying all day. I should say, and apologies to those of you that I've said this to several times already, we have something called an app, which is available to download. It's the official Leaders app. It will give you all the information about all sorts of things, what's on when, over the next couple of days. But also, for this session, it will give you the opportunity to ask questions directly. They will come to this, which is called an iPad, and I will read out the questions to our panellists. It's a very simple formula. You can also, if you don't have the app, click on slido.com, that's SLIDO, and ask your question there. All you need is the code, which is #leaders. We've made it as simple as we can. Right, that's the housekeeping done. Time to get into a big old topic, and the task here is to reimagine the future of sports content. Andy, let's start with you and Recast. Why don't you give us a sense of how you are intending to do that?
Well, I think really it was born out of the fact that fans' consumption and payment patterns are rapidly evolving. That's accelerated, of course, throughout COVID. But if we look at, well, I think first of all, that has driven a misconception across the industry that fans don't want to pay. And yet, if we look at gaming, people are paying. Fortnite generated 5 billion last year through microtransactions. So with Recast, we're looking to create a solution in which fans can get personalized access to video content, whether it's on demand, whether it's live, but they're being rewarded for their engagement within the platform, and that enables them to make microtransactions, micropayments to rights holders who are uploading on-demand content and live.
So what is your sort of starting point for this? Are you looking at a model that is broken, or are you looking at something that needs some sort of light repair?
It depends on which rights holder you're speaking to. So I think the model is broken for many rights holders globally, as the broadcast landscape continues to be further fragmented, and the value is going up to those top-tier rights holders. And so for those other sports, those other governing bodies, those teams, those leagues, how do they generate value? And so if they can't sell their rights to traditional broadcasters, if they can't monetize through social media, traditional social media platforms, and if they can't afford to develop their own OTT platform, that's where we thought we would first offer a solution, particularly to Tier 2, Tier 3 rights holders, where there's no upfront costs, no ongoing costs, and they can set up their own channel with immediacy and start going direct to consumer globally. But in the short amount of time we've been up and running, gained traction and moved into top-tier sports, of course football, across Scottish Premier League with Hibs and Man City, the European Tour on Recast as well, and a whole range from British curling going live a few weeks ago all the way up to football, of course.
Greg, let's bring you in here because you are the commercial director at Hibernian and you've been working with Recast, and you're one of the, I suppose, the early case studies, but also the early success stories in terms of how this is working. First of all, just give us a sense of where what you're doing with Recast fits into your wider content output and media model.
Sure. The very beginning, when I first caught up with Andy about the platform, it was really a question of why wouldn't you, rather than why would you. I'm only just shy of 2 years in the job at Hibernian, and our content strategy, very quickly, you have your traditionalists that want to consume content in a certain way, but the under 25 audience who are used to the in-app purchases and various other things, this was an opportunity to monetize our content in the short form sense. YouTube, for us as a club, it's not generating a lot of income unless you're Joe Wicks. It's not going to return the funds that you want. So by moving some of that content into the Recast platform was a big step for us. And it's not a case of putting the goals from the weekend or anything like that, because you're going to see that on a free-tier platform. So it's creating that unique content. And from a club perspective, it's not just all about the first team. We've been showing the women's matches on Recast. And as recently as last week, we put the Hibernian Hearts Women's Derby, which was a record attendance, and then we also put it on Recast, which generated good numbers. You were actually paying for it on Recast, but you could have went to the game for free, but it still returned good numbers. And then even our fans who have podcasts, they've started putting them on Recast platform, and the money that they generate, they're putting back into the club. So from our perspective, it's bringing everyone closer together, and it's benefiting the club from a revenue perspective.
And Sarah, great to have you with us as well, giving a viewpoint that's steeped in Olympic experience, working for one of the major international sports federations for so long. And one of the interesting dynamics that I think we're going to explore over the next few minutes is almost the football use case here, with a very regular diet of matches, but also a rhythm of behind-the-scenes content, versus what you get in the Olympic world, which are these enormous spikes, and we've just seen one obviously with Tokyo 2020, and then periods between Olympics where Olympic sports, Olympic athletes are battling for attention and profile and additional coverage. And there's the opportunity, right?
Absolutely. Nice to be here, everybody, and greetings from China, where I've been for the last 2 months, preparing for the next...
Preparing for this session.
Big spike. The Beijing 2022 Olympic Winter Games taking place in just over 100 days, and today, in fact, signified the first snowfall. So another important landmark towards the Winter Games. Yeah, it's very interesting how the pandemic has helped to accelerate the new media model, the traditional model where the federations, the Olympic movement rely very heavily on, is having that guaranteed upfront income. That is so important for them. I'm sure everybody has followed during the last 18 months the problems that many of the international federations went through with the uncertainty around Tokyo 2020, and were they able to receive the income that they received from the International Olympic Committee for their role in organising the Games. So this traditional model of the guaranteed income is so important for them to be able to plan securely and to know that their member national associations can do so as well. And therefore the rights are tied up. They're tied up and they've been sold on. So it's a case of, are they prepared to perhaps reduce the amount of rights that are actually marketed in order to take a plunge into a new platform, being able to give the audience, especially the younger audience, what they want, and finding this very nice mix with a balance between, yes, getting a certain security of knowing what you're getting from the traditional rights holders, but also being able to create your own content. Many federations are completely limited. They don't own their own rights. What can they actually use? They need to generate their own content behind the scenes, around the events, and now there's a platform for it without having to do work themselves.
Andy, where do you see the opportunity, not necessarily just from a Recast point of view, but from almost from a micro payments point of view, if you like, when it comes to that kind of federation model that Sarah describes?
Well, I mean, from my own experience as a fan, and even looking back to the London Olympics, and absolutely, totally absorbed in that, and then seeing nothing of those sports that I absolutely loved for the summer, and of course this happened again recently. So what is interesting, particularly throughout those Olympics, and of course with football week to week, we all have our champions. We look to those athletes as and we follow them. I mean, we look at the numbers that PSG had, in terms of their followers on social media, when Messi joined, and it's phenomenal. But how are they working together with the rights holders? You've got rights holders who have rights, not necessarily the reach to that audience, and of course they're trying to establish that through spending a lot of money on creating content, distributing on social media, and it's all well and good to have engagement. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very good marketing tool, but that's the top of the funnel. You've got to reach people, educate them on what your sport is, who are the champions within your sport, but this is the business. I think that's why we're all here, and so you need to generate revenue. And I think that what we're starting to see, and everybody's well aware of it, is that those athletes have the reach, they have the influence, and then the rights holders have the rights. So is there a way in which they can marry together? Not to date, there hasn't been. In Recast, there's an incentivized sharing model. Rights holder can publish content. The athletes can promote. They share in the revenue in which, from every view that comes through. But the rights holders establishing the price point, the sharing ratio, etc. So it's actually flipping the model on its head, in which we're so used to broadcasters buying rights and then trying to really protect them and rip things off of social media, understandably, because then value is lost. And we're flipping that on its head and enabling them to share. And that's where even the number of broadcasters that we're speaking to, they've bought these rights. Some of them are even contractually obligated to distribute, to provide promotion and make the fans aware of it and bring in regular viewership. But how do they model that up? How do they promote it? It gets expensive. So we're even talking to broadcasters about them distributing near live highlights and them live streaming secondary rights that they may have been purchased by the bundle.
Greg, you touched on this in your first answer, but how are you at Hibernian carving out your own space here? Because obviously you've got the league who sell the rights to live games and the live product, and at the other end of the spectrum you've got fan groups, individual fans creating their own content, and obviously this concept of everybody being a broadcaster, everybody being a creator, creates some issues for rights holders. So what are you doing to sort of, for want of a better phrase, mark your territory?
Obviously there's certain things that we can't do because of the rights that we've got in place with the likes of Sky, etc. So for us, it's an opportunity to work closer with our fans and utilise them as user-generated content, which they can then put the money back into the club. So the Long Bangers podcast at the club is actually one of the most powerful fan engagement tools connected to us. And that's one of the success stories in terms of the partnership. They've been really, really strong at it. But the women's game is something that is a big opportunity, especially in Scotland. Obviously, there's been a lot of sessions on women in sport, and we believe that we're giving them the platform not only from a content perspective, but from a commercial perspective, it's putting eyeballs in the women's game, it's showcasing what they can do, and it's not only the games, it's the behind the scenes content, it's training footage, the players are now on it. So when Andy mentions the sharing ratio, it's something that they're getting the benefit of as well as the club. So yes, one of the questions that a lot of clubs might have is how do you create content with the teams that you have, because you've got a lot of other platforms to service. But if you work with these guys, they can create that content for you. And it's been a big thing for us at the club, is to bring everybody closer to the club and work together, rather than keeping everybody at arm's length.
Yeah, and I don't think it needs to be. I think when we've started speaking to people about what our offering is, they're like, oh, but where does this sit alongside our club TV? Yeah. There's Hibs TV, and when I spoke to Greg, I mean, I'm a Hibs fan, but I never subscribed to Hibs TV when I was abroad, just because that model didn't really suit me, and it did for many other people. But there's so much value lost between me watching content on social media as a Hibs fan from the club, about the club, or the only other option is to go to the extreme of paying, you know, a couple £100 a year to subscribe to that. So younger audiences in particular, you know, we know that people are cutting the cord, they're not looking at subscription models, they want value, they want to pay for what they want, when they want. We reward them for their engagement on the platform. So this is not one or the other. Social, Recast, you know, certainly Man City, Hibs, QPR, and other partners of ours who've got their own OTT offering, they see Recast as sitting in the middle there to drive more engagement whilst monetizing and hopefully moving them into the subscription model. But young audiences may never get there.
Do you think what you're doing would work without that reward incentive piece?
Yes, but then it's not far off kind of a traditional model. So particularly younger audiences are used to being rewarded for their engagement in-app. They understand in-app currencies. And for us, the way in which the value can recycle, all that value is being generated, but how is it moving? And so, you know, as a very sort of basic macro view, value is moving from brand to fan if they engage their product or service or watch their ad within the platform. Value goes from fan to rights holder and they cash out, and we just take a percentage there. They're used to doing things and getting rewarded, whether it's something within a game and then, you know, earning extra coins or within that game, and then making microtransactions to get a new sword or a new golf club and golf clash, whatever it may be. So I think for us, when we're looking, we do solve a problem immediately, but if we're looking at the next 5 to 10 years and how the future fan is going to be consuming content, they understand in-app currencies and microtransactions and being rewarded for their engagement. And they know, they don't like getting their data ripped off on traditional social media platforms. So if you're transparent about watch this ad, you get value back, you then spend that elsewhere, it's been extremely well received by the fans, and we're seeing that with conversion for consumption. So QPR live streamed a match a few weeks ago. 1,500 people tuned in. 40% of fans use their credit card details to buy the credits and pay £5 to watch the match. 60% engaged in the build-up to the event, so they earned the £5 worth of credits. They watched the game for free, but QPR still made £5 a view. So it's clearly being adopted and understood by certain audiences.
That was an excellent answer, Andy, and I'm going to reward you with another question. Which comes from Miguel Diaz, who, and it's kind of related because it's a good question about your thoughts on the role of betting houses and betting operators who are also, as we know, investing huge amounts in content, in distribution platforms. So as we plot the future here, where do you see them fitting in?
I mean, naturally, we've been approached by a lot of them because it's a very easy transition, perhaps, to move people from having that currency to then going and placing a bet. For us, there is a major opportunity in itself around content. Beyond that, it's not just sport. We don't look to immediately jump into, let's say, betting partnerships. We're looking at how we can move into music and the way that earnings can be distributed in real time to different rights holders or whoever's involved in that piece of music or content. Gaming, esports, as we've touched on earlier, that being a vertical that we will soon enough launch, considering the amount of traction we're gaining there. For us, we look to move across those different verticals, take the learnings on what's the best content, if that might be different for one rights holder to another rights holder. And then beyond that, there's perhaps opportunities more towards in-app purchases for tickets or NFTs, using the those credits as well to purchase those or merchandise. But for us, we're not looking at that in the near future whatsoever. There's so many more opportunities, and we want to keep it a clean and safe environment. And we don't have comments within Recast, for example. There's no abuse within there. This should be a positive experience for everybody.
Sarah, as we try and sort of map out what the landscape is going to look like, I think the Olympics is always a useful model to look at, not least because it is the most global of events, and that creates its own challenges as well in terms of and opportunities, I guess, in terms of localizing content, in terms of storylines that you can pick out around particular athletes. Obviously, the Olympics, other than its broadcast rights holders, also has the Olympic Channel, which has been running for a few years now. Is something like the Recast model something that you can see complementing what already exists, or does it ultimately become a replacement?
Personally, I see it as a solution to be able to complement and not to take over what's actually happening at the moment. They sit alongside each other and offer completely different segments of the market effectively, because it can be content which is produced not necessarily by the rights holders, but the own little ecosystem who have effectively working together with the rights holders. And for example, recruitment. Recruitment could be one very, very interesting area where the rights are tied up when it comes to the top level events, when it comes to the competitions themselves, but when it comes to the qualification events underneath that you're trying to promote, and you're trying also to connect with those youngsters that you want to get involved in your sport, and they just feel too detached from the very, very best in the world. They admire them, they look at them, they want to be there, but if they see that pathway, and that content is uploaded and it exists and that's something for them to follow, they can imagine, yeah, I could imagine myself there. So it can perform quite an interesting function that will be very, very complementary to the Olympic, to the traditional international federation style markets. So the fact that Andy's comments about betting, for example, I think that would sit very well with the international federation market, with the Olympic movement, in terms of wanting to have a certain distance from there and for everyone to have their, as it were, their own ecosystem.
And take us into the world of an international sports federation, an Olympic sports federation. There's obviously a need, as you said, to engage a wider group of people on a more regular basis. There is also a need to generate as much revenue as possible. Can those two things sort of happen at the same time? Do is there a sort of order of importance being attached to those? What do you sense? You're in and about the Olympic movement. What's the thrust of the conversations that are being had within federations at the moment?
This is something that certainly evolved over the last 20 years, without a shadow of a doubt, insofar as back in the olden days, when the actual costs to run the sport were not as significant as they are now, the importance of eyeballs and the importance of promoting the sport and communicating its values were very, very important. And they underlined everything. But as the whole structure of sport, the complexity of it has built up, the costs to run it become higher, that has certainly changed in terms of the focus. So generating revenue has become very, very important, and has taken over certainly in most Olympic sports as being the fundamental, most important thing, because that is the only way to be able to invest back into the grassroots, invest back into the sport, to generate more participation. And the international federations, the national associations, these are not commercial entities. They potentially have part of their organisation which has a commercial programme, but nevertheless, because of the structure of them and the statutes and so on, they are not-for-profit organisations. Therefore, what they generate in terms of resources are invested back into the sport. And yes, the model has changed without a question. All opportunities to be able to generate income will definitely be attractive to them. And if they are both generating a certain amount of revenue, have minimum or no risk in terms of not having to invest in an OTT platform, but then alongside it, they can also have an angle on recruitment, sounds like a winner.
And Greg, from a Hibernian point of view, you're obviously commercial director. Your job is to find and build revenue streams for the business. What's the partner play here? Is this additional coverage, so therefore it's good? Is it as sort of simplistic as that almost, or is there more complexity to it? And what do you see as the opportunity here in terms of integrating partners and what that might look like into the future?
I think the word opportunity, there's a number of opportunities. I think creating content series that you could then sell to partners and then put that out on the platform, so there's additional sponsorship routes. You've got the basic of building a new audience, as Sarah touched on. I think you're always going to have the traditional routes for content, but we really need to look at the new ways. And I think what Andy and the team have got at Recast is going to allow us to gain that information on that younger audience and what works for them. And then that'll then open the door to new partners in that sector, and then bring them on board at the club. But then as we look to integrate the women's team, the men's team, the academy development, and bring all of them together, that opens up new opportunities as well, rather than just the focus being on the men's team all the time. So I think that as we build through it and build the audience on the platform, and start getting into the analysis and the data and who's watching what, how long they're watching, then I think there's a number of opportunities that we could be looking at in the following months and years ahead. And
Andy, from Recast's point of view, how do you see the partner opportunity? Is this about branded content? Are there other ways in which you see this as a partnership tool moving forward?
Yeah, I think considering the way in which our ecosystem works and the conversations we're having, as an example, if Emirates Airlines, they invest a significant amount into sports marketing and sponsorship, and with that comes content or rights attached to it, but how do they generate value from that? How do they understand who the audience is? So if there was a way in which Emirates have access to certain content and rights, but then they can reward their frequent flyers with CAS credits in exchange for Skywards miles, for example, then they're moving value from the right pocket to their left pocket, but also understanding more about the sports preferences of those individuals, what kind of content they're consuming. They might have come through watching Formula One behind-the-scenes content if they're a sponsor, let's say there, but in fact, we also know that they're a Real Madrid fan. So considering the way in which the value moves through that ecosystem, the sponsors, the brands, it's huge for them. And the brands that have approached us, and like we're kind of, the days are gone where you just stick your sponsor, or, your brand or your logo on the side of something and that's it. Everything's digital. We're looking at different ways to activate. And here you have a way to create a touch point between your product and your service and the fan, and then recoup value through, well, literally the way in which they're consuming content. And that means that those rights holders are more comfortable. We're talking about money up front being of importance. They're more comfortable than selling more value up front to the brand, and the brand can go and extract more value beyond that within the platform through the sale of their products and services. So everybody wins. So those brand partners are extremely important to the ecosystem.
couple of good questions here from Jack McGill. Hi, Jack. What's the revenue comparison to YouTube or Facebook advertising, and how big an incentive is it to make the Recast content exclusive at the expense of other social platforms?
Well, it's very important, starting with the last part of the question there, it's important to have it exclusive just because of, say, if you stick the same video up on YouTube, Facebook and Recast at the same time, they're ingrained in a certain experience, so it's going to be hard to migrate them over. So we've certainly seen maximum value when content is exclusive, primarily with live, near live, but even some behind the scenes content. Joelle Murray, the captain of the women's Hibs team, has generated significant value just from some of her own behind the scenes content. So yes, huge opportunity there as well. Yeah.
I want to touch on micropayments, which I know you talked about earlier, and I think that's something that a lot of people in this room will be, at the very least, starting to think about quite seriously in terms of how it impacts their organisation. And this is obviously a wider trend that goes far beyond sport. As you talked about, the way in which consumers are willing to pay for stuff and their appetite for doing so. Where are you looking outside of sport at where micropayments are working and being used in the right way, and what are you learning from that?
We're all familiar with the likes of Amazon Prime, and there's Apple Plus that came out, but you can also do pay-per-view on Apple. I mean, we've got young children, we've got Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, and then Apple Plus came about, and I was like, I'm in a nine. I mean, it was £4.99 a month. You spend it on a pint. And I was like, well, should we not? And I didn't. But that weekend, I spent £14 on watching a movie because I was like, oh, I want to watch this movie. We've been wanting to watch this movie, so spent that there. And I think that's where the power in microtransactions is, because when people want something in that moment and they get a preview of something, or it's delivered with immediacy, fast forward to the point where you get a notification that your team's just scored a goal and you want to watch that goal with immediacy, and it's going to cost you 5 credits, 5p. They're used to that kind of behavior, and that's where they generate significant value, particularly in the gaming industry. So we often talk about how we look like an OTT platform, but share like social and monetize like gaming. That's precisely what we offer. And there's a lot of learnings that we should take from the esports and gaming industry. The way in which they engage with their fans on a regular basis. There's this always-on sort of approach, but they're always chipping away and monetizing them on a regular basis. So lots of lessons to be learned there, and I think there's a big opportunity for us in the gaming and esports space, and then, like I said as well, in music as well. Considering earnings can be distributed to multiple parties with every single transaction in real time, that solves a pretty big problem in music as well. So.
Good question here from Sam Cherry. Thanks, Sam, and I'm going to put it to you, Sarah, because I think it builds on something we were talking about earlier with regards to the Olympics. How are you seeing this model as a great way of creating localized communities and multiple language offerings for content?
In fact, that's more or less the lines I wanted to steer towards now as well, that this actually has stimulated the creativity in people, that what we're looking at here is not just using the existing content, but in terms of being able to generate and produce new content, to get closer to the athletes, to get behind the scenes, to find out how the training is organised, how a competition is set up. There are so many different aspects that make it interesting to understand how you get to that competition day, to match day, and what are the different roles of all of the support staff who are involved. And this, of course, you can produce in multiple languages that are relevant then to the strong nations, to all nations. And that's where the Olympic movement, with more than 200 national Olympic committees, they have got an opportunity to be able to generate content on mobile phones in a simple, straightforward way, rather than having a complex production with everything that entails, the whole infrastructure. And so it seems to me that there here could be really an ideal opportunity, especially for developing nations, developing sports, to promote themselves. And at the same time, if you're generating income, what's not to like about it? It sounds as though really it's a solution that must be discussed.
Well, it pays for itself. It ends up paying for itself, and therefore, by seeing the returns, going to the first part of Jack's question before, our partners have seen, compared to Facebook, views per minute, 160x. And those are the bigger partners who are generating revenue on Facebook, because they're setting the price point. So instead of it being 0.0005 pounds, per minute viewed, they can charge 4p per minute. And as long as that is compelling enough content that the fan wants to access, then they're like. And of course, if they want, they can subsidise it by watching an ad, and then they watch ads anyway on YouTube. So they can watch an ad and then pay for it, and it's free for them anyway. But the value is realised, and then they can say, well, let's put more money into creating more regular content, more exclusive content, and it's just as self-perpetuating.
Greg, I wanted to build on something you said earlier about the way that you're distributing content around the women's team. Is actually that the biggest opportunity here, given that the models that are in place aren't so established? And I think there is this discussion, and there was discussion earlier on the headline stage, around the extent to which women's sport should be promoted and marketed and broadcast following the same templates laid out in men's sport historically. Is actually the opportunity with the women's team where you think you can almost be the most creative?
I think it is, certainly in the short term. Going back to the Edinburgh Derby that we had last week, there was 5,500 in attendance, but out of that, only 10% of those were season ticket holders for the men's game. So there's a new audience, and a big new audience. And then even when you look at how, as a club, we've been performing on Recast, I think it's around about 8 to 7% of the revenue that's been generated is through the women's content. So we've started making a very conscious effort of putting the men and the women alongside each other, whether it's kit launches or any marketing promotions around about the club. It's definitely that integrated approach, and again, in the short term, I think that's going to be the big option, the opportunity. And then maybe in 3.5 years' time, when the broadcast deals are up, there might be something very different to be discussed around the men's game, which I think will be a real opportunity for someone like Recast. But as a club, the short term is the women's game, but then also the players themselves. I think the next stage for us is to bring the players into the platform and work together with them, where they get a benefit, the club get a benefit, and the fan gets to experience a lot more. I think, to Sarah's point, on a match day, if they were to watch the groundsman setting up the pitch and things like that, that will get views. People want to see behind the scenes content. So the main 2-3 strands that we're focusing on are the women's team, the development team, and behind the scenes content from players. So.
We've got a live stream of this stage being dismantled tomorrow evening, if anybody wants to tune in. We don't.
Get 100 cash for that.
15 cents.
Maybe next year. We had a session earlier where we had a really interesting conversation with Snapchat and with Wimbledon. And we were talking about the concept of test and learn. And you touched earlier, Greg, on you are naturally going to, as you see the data and understand how people are using this and how they're paying and how they're engaging, you're going to know more about it. At this stage, how much of this is test and learn?
Very much so. As a club, we love to be innovative. We were the first Scottish club to put floodlights up. We were the first club in Scotland to play in Europe. We were the first ones to have a commercial sponsorship. So we like to try and be innovative and lead the way. So it was another reason when I first spoke to Andy, again I touched on it at the start, why wouldn't we? That there was nothing to lose from our perspective as a club. It was a win-win, and it's very much a test and learn process, and we're learning after every piece of content. And we're now looking to develop that even further with Andy and JC and the rest of the team. And I'm hugely excited about where this could end up. And I'm delighted that as a club, we're one of the early adopters of the platform and where it can take us.
Now, we like to plan ahead here at Leaders, and on Monday we'll be having our first planning meeting for Leaders Week London 2031. And let's assume we are all together in 10 years' time on this stage. What are we going to be talking about? Andy?
I'm kind of touching on the point I made earlier. I think that we're starting to see that the athletes, the stars, are very much the broadcasters. I often make the point how Cristiano Ronaldo is the largest sports broadcaster on the planet, but he doesn't broadcast any matches he plays in, and he's not allowed to distribute near live highlights, etc. So that's because the model has not existed to date. We know the power in these athletes, these stars, and the reach that they have. I think our model will significantly change the way in which rights holders approach things and looking at using their athletes and their stars as promotion and distribution. Just to be clear, we're not in the business of buying rights, so I'm certainly not thinking that we're going to wipe out all the other broadcasters. There's a place for them, and they're certainly going to invest heavily and continue to do so in those very top-tier sports, but we're there to support everything around that as well, and Tier 2, Tier 3 sports, etc. But I think that even with those top-tier sports and the broadcasters, the ability for them to leverage the reach of those stars and those athletes, I think that Recast will be a global sports broadcaster in 10 years from now. Very much the destination for near live highlights of top-tier sport, and certainly the go-to place for live Tier 2, Tier 3 sports.
Sarah, 2032 Brisbane Olympic Games, revolution or evolution in terms of how we're consuming the games by then?
I think it'll be an evolution with a little bit of revolution.
Sprinkled on top.
Absolutely, yeah, sort of on the top of the cherry. Because the opportunities are there, Australia is the other side of the world to the majority of people, and therefore it's a fantastic opportunity to communicate in a very special way. I think what we will see is the engagement between all of the different entities in terms of the governing bodies, the organisers and the athletes in order to collaborate and to find solutions moving forwards that are going to be a win-win for everybody. And when it comes to Olympic sport, and we've seen it also accentuated during the pandemic, the role that it plays in society. It plays a very important role in society, in touching on the health and welfare of the population, and this is a role that it can play as well. So I hope that that's also going to be a line that is strongly followed to really help us all cohabit in a better way.
And Greg, just quickly, 2031, let's assume Hibernian are multiple Scottish Premier League champions. How are we going to be watching your average Hibs game?
I think you're still going to have your traditional ways to do so, but I think through Recast, I think we'll have a commercial asset there that will be returning a significant six-figure sum of money for the club. I truly believe that it's that substantial for us. And I think that whether it's development games, women's games, youth games, I think it gives them the platform for live broadcast.
Good stuff. What a fascinating session, fascinating glimpse into the future. We look forward to seeing it all come to fruition. Greg, Sarah, Andy, thank you very much. Programming notes, just hold the applause for 1 second because I have to do some quite boring but important housekeeping. That brings to an end the Tech and Innovation Stage action for today. Programming note, the La Liga session that was originally scheduled for 4:30 on this stage will now be taking place on the headline stage. It's a conversation with the new CEO of La Liga Tech. It's well worth joining. Then we obviously have drinks in the exhibition and in fact in many parts of the stadium throughout the evening, so we can all look forward to that. I think now that's the housekeeping. We're back tomorrow. Thanks to the panel and thank you all.